Hi, everyone at the center and online. Welcome to this first session of the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, Introduction to Lojong, through the text called Wheel of Sharp Weapons. Thanks. So, of course, the Lojong tradition in Tibetan Buddhism is unique because it's it's a way to transform obstacles into opportunities for practice. And yeah, it's incredibly powerful. So I'm excited for this program. I won't say anything more because of course, we have Venerable Lekden leading this teaching today. This series is going to continue over a few weeks. So Venerable Lekden has been incredibly kind to offer to lead this teaching and many other teachings in this series. He was born in the US. Since the last decade and a half, he's been living in South India at the Sarajay Monastery in Bailkuppe. He's been studying for his Geshe program, which is the equivalent of a PhD in Buddhist philosophy. So obviously he's extremely good at Buddhist philosophy, and I'm looking forward to all the insights he's going to share on the Lojong tradition. So thank you so much, Venerable Lekden. Over to you.
Thank you. Actually, you can hand these out. People that are here.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today, both online and in person. Very happy and excited to be starting this program. Let's take a moment to center ourselves in the space. So whatever has been going on today, whatever running around we've been doing, however we've been spending our weekend, we put that to the side. Take a moment to allow ourselves to be 100% present in the space where we've come together to study the teachings of the Buddha, to study our mind. Let all of our worldly distractions be left outside. And if you're at home, wherever you are, create a sacred space for yourself. Whatever distractions there may be, you can just set them to the side for the moment. Now we set a very strong motivation that the reason we've come together tonight to study the teachings of the Buddha, and especially to study these powerful teachings on mind training, is not merely for our own benefit, though we will receive personal benefit, but it is so that we might be of more benefit to others. The whole reason for engaging in practice is so that we might be able to serve others in a more meaningful and complete way. Of course, the best way to serve others is to quickly become Buddhas ourselves. So we have infinite numbers of skillful means and methods and an omniscient mind with which to serve others. But until then, we develop whatever wisdom and whatever method or skill we can, and we use it in the service of others. So it is for that reason that we've come together. It's for that reason that we study and we practice and we try to tame our own minds, to overcome the obstacles in our life, yes, to find more contentment in our life, but all for the purpose of being better equipped to be of service. So set the strong motivation that I'm here today with a bodhicitta motivation and intention, with the wish to improve my mind for the purpose of helping other sentient beings. And so as we set this strong motivation, we'll offer some preliminary prayers. So in our prayer book on page 34, we'll offer refuge and bodhicitta prayers. Last time we had to turn the gain up quite high in order for it to catch. So it might be you have to check the gain. So we'll offer refuge and bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan, then once in English, and then we will continue with the other prayers in English on these 2 pages. Sangye chiran soki shonam lai chanshu paru dagni kyaksu chi dagi jin sogi pe sonam gi drola pinche sangye dru par sho sangye chiran soki shonam la Danjo Baru Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sange Druparsho Sange Chiran Soki Chonam La Danjo Baru Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sange Druparsho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain in existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So the mandala offering, we'll offer once in Tibetan and then once in English. So when you make a mandala offering, you visualize that you're offering all of existence. Here visualized as Mount Meru and the 4 continents. But all of existence, you first visualize it, then you visualize it purified so that it is itself a pure land, free from all faults. And you offer that to all the Buddhas, requesting their blessings, requesting their inspiration. Sange Shindu Me Te Oi Yoku Namanda Shila Shiba Sho. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And let's offer praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tame, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who were wise then, I prostrate. You have bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realization, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great, thank you. So welcome everyone to this series on Lojong, on mind training. So the original request was to teach the wheel of sharp weapons, and that is still the goal by Dharma. However, with the way the schedule worked out is that we weren't sure if we'd have 2 or 3 classes before we'd have to take about a month-long break because all of us are going to be busy. And this is 120 verses long. So we didn't want to start it and get to like a part in the middle and then stop for a full month. So what we thought we'd do is an introduction to Lojong first to help get our way into a Lojong mindset, and then we'll do that for the next 3 weeks. And then when we come back from the break, then we'll have 4 weeks in a row where we can do really sharp weapons without any break. So we thought that would be a stronger way to do it. And so for our introduction session, we decided to discuss the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland by Atisha, which we've given out copies of to everyone. And even this, we're going to go through quite quickly. I've led retreats on this where we've done 10, 15, even 20 sessions, but we'll use this as our introduction to Lojong. So that's why we haven't given out copies of Wheel of Sharp Weapons today. So, the first question is, what is Lojong? So Lo means mind, and Jo means to study or to train, right? So that's where we get mind training. So what do you mean by mind training? Isn't all of Buddhism mind training, right? Isn't everything we do mind training? So where does this special meditative or practice come from? And why is it different than everything else? So that is the first thing we need to know, is like, why are we interested in Lojong? And what makes it different than another type of practice? And Lojong, if we want to trace it, where the tradition of it comes, we first see it in Tibet from Atisha. And Atisha himself studied texts that are considered some of the earliest Lojong texts we have, which are the Wheel of Sharp Weapons and Peacock in the Poison Grove. Those are both attributed to Dharma Rakshita. And he was one of Atisha's teachers. And Atisha brought those texts to Tibet and taught them to Drang Tongpa. Now, before Dharma Rakshita, so before the 10th century, we can see some Lojong teachings in Shantideva's texts, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, like little bits and pieces here. We would recognize them as part of the Lojong kind of category, but dedicated Lojong texts, we don't really see any. Really, really sharp weapons and Poison in the Peacock Grove, Peacock in the Poison Grove are the two most common texts we see as the earliest Lojong texts. And so this tradition really we see taking off in Tibet in the end of the 10th century, beginning of the 11th century. And then it was pretty active for a while, and then it kind of went away. And then around the time of the 7th Dalai Lama, I think, it was noticed, there were some scholars that noticed that the practice of it had waned, and they requested it to more teachings on it. So then it kind of became popular again. Right? And before we talk about what it is, just to know some of the text, if you're interested. So the text, there is a book that we don't have it here, but the very first book. So this is the Library of Tibetan Classics, which is a series of, I think, 48 books that Wisdom Publications is putting out in conjunction with press here in India, and they're being translated. And these are what His Holiness Dalai Lama has helped pick, these 48 texts that are critical to the Tibetan religious and cultural identity, right? And the first one that was out is called Mind Training, the Great Collection. And so this is the second volume, called the Book of Kadam, which I'll get to in a second. But so if you want to look for mind training texts, the Book of Kadam and Mind Training, the Great Collection have all of the texts basically that are the main texts in our tradition, right? The first one is called Mind Training, the Great Collection. And it has, I think, maybe 40 different texts in it. You know, some of them are very short. So the 8 verses of mind training you'll see in there. You'll see the oldest text in there, beside it has both Wheel of Sharp Weapons and Peacock in the Poison Grove in that collection. Other than that, the oldest ones are from Atisha. And the nice thing about that, these are both translated by Tutin Jumbo. And they list in that one who all of the teachers are, who composed these texts or recited them, and what years they are. So you can see kind of the trajectory of these texts.
Last year we did this mind training like the rays of the sun. So that would be one of the.
So no, that's a newer text. So mind training like the rays of the sun is part of the mind training tradition, but it's not one of these core texts from the 11th, 12th, 13th century. It's a more contemporary text based on this tradition, right? And so to think of mind training, it's important that we understand the way, it's useful that we understand the way it came to Tibet and the way it became popular through Atisha and through Drom Tompa, right? Drom Tompa was Atisha's, one of his heart disciples. And Drom Tompa was a layperson. He's often just referred to as the upasaka, which means householder, right? That they call him that as a name instead. And there's a whole story. We consider Drom Tompa to be an incarnation of Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, right? Avalokiteshvara. And the reason he took birth as a layperson and not a monk in Tibet at that time was for the purpose of benefiting the lay people, right? He recognized that by taking birth as a layperson, he would inspire lay people to realize they could also be practicing. So he really was an exemplar to show us that everyone can achieve, great realizations in this life. So he encouraged lay people to engage and practice, and he also encouraged lay people to have more respect for the Sangha as well, because everyone recognized Drom Tompa as being a great scholar. Yet whenever any Sangha, even a monk who'd been ordained for one day, was by, he would make offerings to them and prostrate to them. So by doing that, they realized this great scholar has such respect for the ordained Sangha that he also inspired more faith in the three jewels in general in Tibet, right? And so thinking of that, mind training tradition really came through Tsongkhapa through Drom Tompa. And the reason that's useful to think about is because the purpose of mind training is to take the teachings and make them applicable to our everyday life right now, right? So mind training has as its focus, this is a very simplified idea, but it's looking at the self-cherishing mind as being the most destructive, poisonous mind that infiltrates all of our thoughts. And it makes all of our suffering come to light, is due to our self-cherishing, right? And now, of course, we could say, and they talk about this in the text, that really self-cherishing itself comes from self-grasping, right? This misunderstanding the nature of reality, grasping at the self as if it truly existed, and grasping at external phenomena as if they truly exist. And from that comes self-cherishing. That's true. So it's not the root of samsara. The root of samsara is self-grasping. But self-cherishing is something we can see in our everyday lives quite easily, right? It's quite easy to analyze. It's quite easy to recognize it. And so in these texts, they don't say emptiness is not important. And in fact, Atisha and Jomtompa both say that it's important to recognize the nature of reality, because by studying emptiness, that is the only real antidote to prevent any of our negative minds from returning, is having an understanding of the nature of reality and getting rid of self-grasping. So they're not saying emptiness is not important, but they're saying for the average person, looking at the self-cherishing mind is so prevalent in our lives. It's something we can grasp onto quite easily, and we can make big gains in our practice, right? That's the important thing, is that this is something we can do and see the effects of quite readily. We can meditate on emptiness, every day for years and years and years and make progress, but it's sometimes hard to recognize that progress. And if you live a busy life and you have a family or you have work and you have all these things, it can be difficult to see how that progress is, affecting your life. But if you look at self-cherishing and you do your best to undermine your self-cherishing mind and the many ways it infiltrates your life, you can see the result of that quite quickly, or at least it has that potential, right? So for that reason, obviously these teachings were all given to monks, but they also were recognized as teachings that lay people can see and adapt and use in their everyday lives in a meaningful way. Right. So the teachings were really this expansive way of looking at the Dharma and saying that we put all of our blames, this is a very famous line, all blames are pointed on a single point. Point all blames to a single point, which is the self-cherishing mind, right? Put all faults, blame them on a single thing, which is the self-cherishing mind. That's the only true enemy we need to ever worry about vanquishing. All of your external enemies don't matter. They only exist as apparitions, right? The real enemy, the only one that you need to worry about fighting, is the inner enemy, which is self-cherishing. So there are different types of mind training practices, but all of them are focusing on looking at the self-cherishing mind and getting rid of it, right? So some of the practices are how to take your everyday obstacles or difficulties, transform them into part of your practice. Other types of practice are like Tonglen, the giving and taking meditation, which is specifically about recognizing that we can take suffering onto ourselves and use that suffering as a way to beat back our self-cherishing mind. Right? So there are a number of different parts of the mind training practice. And mind training, it doesn't disregard everything else we study, right? It's just a new lens for it. So when you look at mind training texts, for instance, a great text that's an example is the 37 Practices of Bodhisattva by Gyalten Sampo, right? I think we studied that just recently, a couple of months ago. That's a mind training text, but it also goes through Lamrim, Tsongkhapa and Atisha's Lamrim stages. So he uses mind training as the focus to understand the Lamrim, right? So mind training isn't separate from the rest of these texts. It is inherent within them. It's just a different way to understand how we approach Dharma, focusing with uprooting self-cherishing as the primary goal, and then the rest of our understanding of Dharma is pointing towards that goal, and we're using it towards that end. It takes Dharma and makes it very practical, like not esoteric. And so much of Dharma, even never mind Tantra, but even trying to understand the nature of emptiness can feel quite esoteric, right? We say everything exists, but it doesn't truly exist, and so forth. Like that can seem like a very philosophical idea that's hard for most of us to grasp on an everyday level, right? So when you focus on self-cherishing and you use self-cherishing as the lens through which you look at death and impermanence, perfect human rebirth, the law of cause and effect, belief in karma, how to rely upon a guru, and so forth. When you put those all through the prism of self-cherishing, it gives you a different type of focus. So that is the power of the mind training teachings. To look at the effect of our ego and how our ego, our self-cherishing mind, is causing us destruction day in and day out, right? And so, of course, if we think of self-cherishing as the general, then his lieutenants are the 8 worldly dharmas, right? The minds of the 8 worldly concerns. And so one of the ways that is taught to help overcome the self-cherishing mind is to identify the 8 worldly concerns in our lives and really see why we follow them, when we follow them, how we follow after them, and what it would be like to actually abandon them. So what are the 8 worldly concerns? I know I talk about them all the time. So So again, there's 4 things to abandon, right? And there are 4 things that we're constantly seeking and 4 things that we're trying to avoid. So they come in 4 pairs. So what's the first pair?
Gain and loss.
Gain and loss, right? So if any of our actions, right, are focused with the intention, explicit or implicit, that we're seeking out gain for ourselves in some way, whether that be wealth or some sort of a fiscal gain, or even just another type of like a social status type of gain, right, or profit for ourselves, or we're trying to avoid our own loss. If that is our motivation, that's a worldly motivation only. It's never going to be a Dharma motivation, okay? At the best, it will be mixed, if we're lucky, but it's always going to be worldly. And if the point of Dharma is to overcome the samsaric worldly delights, right, to transcend into a state that is beyond samsara, then we need to try to avoid all this worldly practice. So first is gain and loss, and then that's okay. We can go in any order. That's fine. So praise and criticism, right? So very similar. How many of our actions or our motivations for today are done because we're seeking out to be praised? And how often are we trying to avoid being criticized? And then? So popularity or fame, and then infamy, okay? And then the last one, which usually is taught second, but that's okay. Not quite. Close. It's just, this is actually the hardest one to understand. It's the hardest one, I think, for most of us. Comfort and discomfort, right? Comfort and discomfort. Because of course we want to be comfortable, like physically comfortable, emotionally comfortable, right? We don't want discomfort. So those are the 8 worldly concerns. And if we're trying to think of the self-cherishing mind, so the self-cherishing mind, very simply, is the mind that says, I'm more important than you. My happiness is more important than your happiness. That's what we mean by the self-cherishing mind, very simply, right? It's a mind that prioritizes me and my needs above others. So obviously the opposite of that would be the mind that says, your happiness is more important than my own, right? Your comfort, your delight, your joy, your success is more important than my own. That's the mind that cherishes others. If we look at those 8, even some of them seem rational. Like, of course, it's useful if we live in the world to have people, we want praise, right? It's good for people to praise us because usually it means we're doing something right. Or we want comfort. We don't want to put ourselves into difficult or uncomfortable situations. So that on a worldly level, that makes sense. But ultimately, what are those doing is they're feeding this mind that says, my happiness is more important than yours. Therefore, I deserve this, right? I've earned this in some way or another. So what the 8 worldly concerns do, when they're implicit or explicit, all they're doing is feeding the self-cherishing mind. This idea that my happiness is more important than your own. And so you'll see these mentioned in almost all of our mind training texts in one way or another, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, sometimes only a few of them are mentioned. But these 8 things are what, at the core level, we need to always be on search for in our life and say, did I engage in this action just because I wanted praise or popularity, right? Did I agree to give this teaching just because I wanted people to know how well I've understood Buddhist philosophy, right? And to think, oh, what a great teacher he is. Is that why I agreed to do it? And the thing about Dharma is that we say that the intention is more important than the outcome, at least for me, right? So if the only reason I come here to teach is because I want to be a popular teacher and to gain like notoriety or fame as a popular teacher, even if I give really great, clear teachings that are beneficial to all of you, for me, that would not be virtuous, right? And it would, for me, be caused for me to experience suffering in the future. Now, the outcome from your side may be beneficial if those teachings are helpful, but from my side, it would not be a virtuous action, right? It would only be feeding my self-cherishing mind. So as the person engaging in the action, the process is more important than the outcome, right? If you flip that, that's also useful for me. Flipping that is to realize that when I am engaging, no matter what the situation is, I can try to find benefit in that situation, regardless if that is what was intended by the other person or not, right? So in that example, if my reason for giving Dharma teachings is to become popular and famous, but I give clear teachings and it's beneficial to you, right? In that way, you can find benefit even if I don't have the best of intentions. right? And so that's an easy example. But we can see in our lives when we are in relationships with people or in certain circumstances where people may not have our best interests at heart, but we can still use those circumstances to benefit our mind, to improve our practice, even if that's not their intention. So for me, understanding the eight worldly concerns and understanding how I can flip them is also useful, because no matter the circumstance I'm in, I can find a way to make that part of my spiritual practice, to find benefit for myself, even if that isn't the intent of the other people in the circumstance. Right? I'm always careful when I talk about mind training, because it can seem like you're celebrating being a victim or being a martyr, right? You're celebrating suffering, because when you have suffering, then it's something to practice with. We're not celebrating it. We don't go out seeking it, but we recognize that it is an undeniable part of our life, that we're going to be in difficult circumstances. We're going to be experiencing suffering on coarse levels and on subtle levels, right? All sentient beings are subject to the suffering of aging, sickness, and death. That is unavoidable, right? So when we find ourselves in those situations, instead of running from them, we can turn them around in such a way that they still benefit us, even if that wasn't the intent of the other people that are participating.
It could get a bit hard in distinguishing when you ought to, because there are times when you ought to speak. Or does mind training say?
Yeah. So, so in all these texts that we study, they teach them, we are looking at the paradigm of what we should be able to practice like, right? The ideal, as a bodhisattva, what we should be able to do. That's the ideal that we're going for. Often in our lives, we don't have those circumstances where we do need to make concessions, depending on our lives. So we do have to speak up sometimes. Ideally, we wouldn't have to. If we had practiced far enough in our mind and we developed our mind enough, we wouldn't have to, right? But that's not the circumstances we have. So for me, I try to be pragmatic. And so, of course, if the actions that are happening are causing harm to others, then of course it's worth speaking of, right? Even if it's a harmful situation that I can deal with personally and I can navigate it in such a way to benefit me, but it's causing harm to others in some way, then it's useful to speak up, to try to prevent that harm, if speaking up would be helpful to that, right? But we have to just be careful and say, why, make sure our motivation is very clear. Like, why am I speaking up? Is it just because I don't want discomfort? Or is it because there's something else going on, or this is a necessary situation, right? So yes, we live in the world, we live in samsara, and we're not perfect beings. So we have to do the best we can, right? And even sometimes, again, this is I'm always inspired by the fact that when we look at our instruction for studying how to develop shine, calm abiding meditation, or calm abiding single point of concentration, the first advice is to abandon your homeland and find an isolated place, right? And that's just to calm your mind. And the reason isn't because you need to be away from other people. It's because when you're in conditions that are overwhelming, filled with the overwhelming experiences of attachment and anger and all of your habitual customs with the people that you know and you love, then it's difficult, right? So you create more conducive conditions so you are able to be more dedicated to your practice. And then once you have developed in your practice, then you can go back to the more difficult conditions. So I remind myself of that a lot because, quite often I'm not doing the ideal. I'm doing the best I can. And I have to recognize that given my circumstances, this is the best I can do. So as long as I am actually exerting effort, then that is, I think, what is most important, right? That's another part of the reason I think that Drom Tompa, really promoted this type of teaching of Lojong for lay people, because it is a type of practice where you don't have to be perfect to find benefit in it, right? By doing it even a little bit, to look at your mind and see how my constantly seeking out my own comfort, how does that actually lead to my suffering? That's something I can identify. It doesn't take a genius who has studied Buddhist philosophy for decades and has deep meditation practice to understand that. It just takes a little bit of reflection, at least to understand it on a course level. And the true goes wrong is how often do we spend our life seeking out profit or gain, and how many times have you seen people in ridiculous ways just because they want to have a little bit more money in their bank account, right? And you can observe it quite easily, right? When you see people doing foolish things just to have a little bit more popularity. I mean, look popularity, I think, is maybe the more insidious and dangerous one these days with the internet and with social media. What people will do just to gain popularity on the internet is wild, right? And you can look at it from afar and say, all you're doing is creating obstacles for your own happiness. Because now you've tied your happiness to other people's thoughts about you. You've tied your sense of happiness, your sense of self, your sense of self-esteem on what other people think about you, on how big your bank account is, right? On how luxurious of a house you have. So once you've done that, you have relinquished all control over your own happiness. And you said, my happiness only exists in relation to other people and to what they give me or don't give me. So all you've done is you've given away all of your own power, right? You've totally stripped yourself, denuded yourself of any sort of autonomy in that way. And we can observe that quite easily with gross examples. So then we use that then as a mirror to look at ourselves and say, okay, if I can see other people doing it this way, then what does that mean about me, right? And so I think it's a particularly powerful practice and something that everyone can do, which is why Jerome Tongpo was such a proponent of it. So before we get into the text today, I wanted to discuss first. So all of these 11th century and so on teachers in Tibet that come from the direct lineage of Atisha are known as the Kadampas, right? That's the kind of how they're understood. The Kadampas are Kadampa Geshes. And we have this practice that Lama Rinpoche would often teach about called the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampas. And so these are the 10 wealths, the 10 types of wealth that made Kadampa practitioners wealthy. Like this is what they had understood as wealth. And I thought I'd use that as an entryway into our mind training texts and study. So the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampas. Again, there are lots of groups that are called the wealth. We'll find out that the text that we're going to study today in the next 3 weeks, it teaches Jewel Garland, teaches about the 7 types of wealth of the Aryas. So there's lots of groups of the different types of wealth. Always they're emphasizing how wealth is not really about external things. But here we're talking about the innermost jewels of the Kadampas. So these are minds or attitudes, which are what make them ultimately let's say wealthy, for lack of a better term. This is to be an innermost jewel is something you hold precious, right? When we think of jewels, we think of something that is precious, both precious in a worldly sense, but also something that is worth seeking out, at least according to worldly beings, right? And so an innermost jewel is the most precious you can find. It isn't external wealth, it is internal wealth. So the Kadampa Geshes define themselves as being internally wealthy, not externally wealthy. So if you're seeking an internal type of wealth, an internal jewel, then what is that jewel going to look like? And so there are 3 groupings for the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampas. And the first are what we call the 4 entrustments, which is a very awful word. I just don't know if there's a better one. So the 4 types of entrustment. And so the first one is you trust or you entrust your innermost mind to the Dharma. So you entrust your mind to the Dharma. That's the first entrustment. And what does that mean, right? It means that when we entrust our mind to the Dharma, we are trying to turn our back on a worldly mind and adopt a Dharma mind. So a worldly mind is a mind that is seeking out any of the 8 worldly concerns. A worldly mind is a mind that is motivated by self-cherishing, right? That's what we mean by a worldly mind. So you're taking your innermost mind and saying, I'm not going to let my innermost mind be a worldly mind. I'm going to make it a Dharma mind, a mind that seeks out the benefit of others, that turns its back on worldly delights. So trying to adopt this attitude of abandoning worldly behavior. That's what it means to entrust your mind to the Dharma. Okay. So that's the first level. So as a jewel, what that means is that any of these Kadampa Geshes, one of the things they hold most precious is that they don't fit into what is expected as the status quo. They aren't the norm. They've turned their back on worldly life. Now, that doesn't mean they're all living in mountains or in the caves at they're homeless people that are wearing rags. What it means is they don't have minds that are attached to the pleasures of this life, right? That's what it means to abandon a worldly mind. Now, many of the Kadamba Geshes may have been living in caves. They may have looked like madmen from the outside, but that's not the point. The point is the mind that is transformed, right? This is mind training, not body training, right? We're transforming the way we experience and perceive the world. It doesn't have to change the way our physical existence in the world is. So that's the first jewel, is you entrust your mind to the Dharma. Now, the next one, after you've entrusted your mind to the Dharma, so you have this jewel of adopting a Dharma mind and abandoning the worldly mind, then you entrust the innermost Dharma to the beggar. Beggar. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they're all beggars, right? Even though the word for in Tibetan, Gyalten, a fully ordained monk, means a virtuous beggar. That's what that means. Or a beggar of virtue. It means both. It doesn't mean they're all beggars. What it means is by eliminating a mind focused on worldly concerns and instead focusing on the Dharma, then taking that mind and entrusting it to the beggar, it means recognizing that you're going to discard all of your attachment to your possessions and to status. Right? Again, doesn't mean you give away all of your things. It means you're discarding your attachment to possessions and to status, recognizing that the things you own and that the status you have in society is not what makes you a practitioner. And all it does is feed your ego. So just like a beggar is outside of the norms of society, that is what you are also seeking to be. When everyone else says that we are defined by the things that we own, and that is what makes us important people in society, someone that's entrusted their mind to the beggar, the innermost Dharma to the beggar, is saying, no, none of those things are important. Possessions aren't important. My mind is not attached to them. It's not attached to my status. Right? So that is what it means to entrust your mind, your innermost Dharma, to the beggar, is to get rid of all attachment to possessions as well as to status. Not just, I'm going through these quickly. We're going to do Intro to Lojong over these 3 weeks, but it's going to be pretty much a rush course. But over the 7 weeks, a lot of the same ideas are going to come up over and over again. So obviously you're free to ask questions, but I'm going to go through things a little quickly. I will say, as an example, this text we're going to start studying today, hopefully, the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland. It has 23 verses. The first 500 pages of this is the Book of Kadam, is a commentary on those 23 verses, right? So you can see that there are much more extensive ways to give these teachings. So we're going to do an abbreviated version today. Very unlike Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, we'd still be talking about the word lo if he was giving this teaching in Lojong. So we entrust our innermost mind to the Dharma. We entrust our innermost Dharma to the beggar. Then we entrust the innermost beggar to death. Now, it doesn't mean we're seeking out death, but it means we recognize that we are going to be experiencing hardships as part of our practice, right? That if we are having a practice that is saying, I don't need worldly delights, I don't need to have nice things, I don't need to have worldly comforts, and that those things actually feed my ego, and by actively not seeking those out, that means we're going to have discomfort and hardships that we may not be used to. And so instead of running away from those, saying, not running towards them, like not embracing them and saying, great, I want to suffer, but saying, I recognize I'm going to suffer, and I can do so with a joyful mind. So I'm not afraid of hardship. And I recognize that hardship is the nature of samsara. I'm going to experience hardship. And as long as my mind is, a samsaric mind, and as long as I haven't made progress in my practice, then I'll experience these external things as hardship. You look at people who have practiced for a long time, right? And you see, for instance, I've talked about it a lot, but Geshe Tsoga, who I studied with, or I lived with for a while in Boston, at the center I worked at and I studied at, very shortly after I met him, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. And he lived with liver cancer for about 2 years before he passed away. And over the course of those 2 years, you saw his body wasting away. He was in pain all the time. It was liver cancer, like it's what it was. Never did it affect his mind. Never did he say like, oh, woe is me. And never did that sickness cause him emotional distress because he'd been practicing so intently for so long that for most of us, I get the flu and it makes me unhappy and miserable, right? Never mind something like cancer. So I'm not saying that we're bad people for doing it. That's a normal response. But when you've practiced and you've tamed your mind, then whatever external hardships you experience, they don't upset your mind, right?
Disrespectful at all. But how do you know he was after all your teacher? He's probably not going to come and complain to you.
That's true.
Privately, like the mind wasn't suffering as well.
It could have been, but I wasn't his attendant. I just happened to live in the house with him. But there was another nun. There was a nun there who was his attendant, and she spent all day with him almost all the time. And you'd observe him, and his behavior and his attitudes and his way of teaching and his way of being in the world didn't change from when he was diagnosed to when he wasn't, right? So just everything about him and our experience of him didn't change at all. So if internally he was having a tornado inside, we don't know. But from all external signs, it appeared that he didn't have any, unhappiness in his mind. He didn't have any distress in his mind. His biggest distress was for not being able to continue teaching and to leave students without a teacher. But luckily, his nephew was there, and he was happy that his nephew could take over for him, right? So I don't know his mind, right? But from all outer signs, it appeared that he had no distress. And even you can look at Lama Zopa Rinpoche after he showed the aspect of having a stroke, right? Lama Zopa Rinpoche showed this aspect of having a stroke, and he's in the hospital trying to recover from a stroke, and half his body is paralyzed, and everyone's trying to get him to do PT, and instead he is just trying to bless the physical therapy pool and to make all the give blessings to all the nurses and all these things, doing all the things that all the nurses are saying, don't do this, and he's like, no, none of this matters. All of us students are so stressed out, and he's just laughing. Whenever you saw any videos of him, he was just laughing and smiling the whole time, right? Now, of course, we don't know his mind, but from all signs, it shows that due to his practice. And now we, obviously, as students of him, I see him as a Buddha, so that's different. But even outside of that, even if you don't recognize him as a Buddha, you just see him who has been practicing his whole life, that has such a strong mind of meditation and devotion, and he understands the Dharma so clearly that all of these external hardships didn't matter, right? They didn't affect his mind. So when you entrust your innermost your innermost beggar to death, it is saying that it's an adopting mind that says, I understand hardships are going to be part of this practice, and I'm not going to shy away from them, and that I'm not going to face them with a mind that's distraught, but instead a mind that's joyful, right? And then the fourth of these entrustments is you entrust your innermost death to the cave. And that is almost the hardest one, right? What that is saying is that at the time of death, I will be alone. I may not have my loved ones near me. I may not have Dharma practitioners to recite prayers for me. I may not have the comfort of a nurse or a doctor to ease my pain or my suffering in any way. So I can trust my own mind that at the time of death, even if I am alone in the world, I won't let that upset my mind. So not only am I willing to accept hardships joyfully, but I'm also willing to put my mind in a place that accepts the fact that by not living a worldly life, I may be creating a condition where I'm not, where when I die, I'm alone, at least physically alone. And I accept that, right? That during the most difficult transition of this life, I may be by myself. And that is not something I have to be scared of. Because if I do the work to tame my mind, then it isn't something to fear. So you trust your innermost mind to the Dharma, your innermost Dharma to the beggar, your innermost beggar to death, and your innermost death to the cave. And the reason is to the cave. So that at the time of death, all you need to do is find a small dry cave where you can be by yourself. That's the analogy. Like animals, exactly. You know, when my last year of grad school, I had to write a master's thesis, and a lot of my I read through the Book of Kadam and the Book of Mind Training as part of like the two of the main sources for my teaching or for my thesis. And so these were like really in my mind at the time. And before I knew I was going to ordain, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, I was in a meeting with my advisor, and he asked me, he's like, so what? And I knew I didn't want to do a PhD at that point. He's like, so what do you want to do? Like, I don't, he's like, what do you want to be doing right now? And I said, be honest, Charlie, I just want to have a mind that is content to crawl into a cave and die like a dog. And he goes, okay, that's good. You know, because he comes from this tradition that, you know, he knows what this is about. If you can have a mind that is content at that, that is amazing. And the reason it's amazing is not because you want to die that way, but think, if you have a mind that is practiced to the extent where I am so stripped of my attachment to worldly things that if I were to die by myself in a cave alone and not be upset, what would that mind look like right now in my everyday life before I reach that point, right? Because the goal is to have that kind of mind now while I'm living in the world. It's not to say that at the time of death I could have that mind, it's to have that mind right now. So if you can have a mind that is that level of calm and of so divorced from external validation and is reliant on the Dharma as your internal motivation, it does obviously we want to have a beneficial mind at the time of death. We know that, but the point is to have that level of insight now in our life, right? And think, if you can have that level of contentment in your everyday life, how much easier would your everyday life be? If you develop a mind that is able to go die like a dog in a cave by yourself and not be upset by that, then think of like the small obstacles you had throughout your day today and how much easier they'd be. Like, you know, for me, on my way here today, the bus I was supposed to take didn't show up because something was wrong with it. So then a substitute bus came about 15 minutes late. And then our whole bus trip was like 45, 50 minutes late. Like I got to Bangalore about an hour later than I was scheduled to. And I had all these plans today to go to a coffee house. I had all these plans of what I wanted to do when I got here to relax before preparing all these things. And like everything got turned upside down, right? And my first instinct was like, God, I had plans. And they weren't complicated plans, but they were plans. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, what is look at how much those silly, like my attachment to this external plan, you know? So luckily I saw really quickly that my mind was distressed based on these external things. And then I was able to say, okay, well, so much for plans. This is what we do, right? But my first instinct wasn't that. Luckily, it was my second, third, or fourth instinct, right? That's what we can hope for. Because we still, as we're practitioners, we're not there yet. But if we can notice when we're creating more suffering for ourselves, because my plans being turned upside down, that didn't create suffering. It was my attachment to my plans that created suffering, right? My distress. It wasn't that like I couldn't do what I wanted to do. It was that I was defining my sense of contentment and happiness on those external things. And so then when it was taken away from me, I was left without anything, right? I was just fortunate enough to realize it. So those are the 4 types of entrustment. The Kadampas hold them as precious. Those are the jewels of their practice that make them wealthy, that make them valuable, that they have a mind that is content in these ways, a mind that turns its back on all worldly delights, a mind that gives up all attachment to physical possessions or to status or to fame, a mind that recognizes that hardship is part of this practice, and instead of shying away from it, recognizes it with a joyful mind as part of the practice, and a mind that is content to be on its own at the most difficult parts of its life. Those are the 4 types of entrustment that are considered jewels. The next 3 are the 3 Vajras. So the 3 Vajras, the first one is called the unwavering Vajra. And what this is, it is a mind that has a steadfast, which is to say unwavering satisfaction with even the most meager of conditions. Right? And this is especially when you're thinking about doing practice. If you're going to do a meditation retreat or something, is recognizing what is the minimum you need in order to survive in this retreat and being content with that minimum and not needing more than that. not spending all your time filling up a cave full of provisions when you really only need much fewer, right? So yes, if you're going to go somewhere and do a month-long retreat, then you need provisions, right? And even in our everyday life, we need things to survive. We need enough money to pay for the house we live in. We need food. We need these things. But we only need the amount we need, and the amount we want aren't the same thing. And so the unwavering Vajra is the mind that has a satisfaction with the bare minimum and realizes that I need these things to survive because I need to take care of my body in such a way that I can continue to practice Dharma. So I do need to eat food. I do need to have shelter. I need clothing to keep my body warm or protected from the elements. But I only need a bare minimum enough to keep me healthy and able to practice Dharma in a meaningful way. And I can be satisfied with that and not need more than that.
Yes, it's difficult to sort of say what is the minimum.
You have to analyze and see. Yeah. But there's no like black and white, like this is the minimum for you and for me and for everyone. It'll be a little bit different, But we can often see the difference between our needs and our wants. It's quite often we can analyze and say, is this something I really need or is this something I want, And then we can kind of go about all of the different things that we cling to and see what are my needs, what are my wants. And so the unwavering Vajra is the mind that is able to be satisfied with the bare minimum, that isn't disappointed, that says, this is all I need. This also is in reference to keeping our vows purely, whether it be the 5 vows of a layperson, or whether it be the Bodhisattva vows, or tantric vows for that matter. By keeping our vows purely, we are recognizing that this is the minimum of our practice, right? And we can be satisfied with it, and we can, by unwavering, what it means is that we don't fluctuate. Let's say the vows aren't important, or that I can go away from them for the ones that don't seem meaningful to my life, or I don't think are important. Unwavering says that we are steadfast in our practice of the vows and recognizing them as being the foundation of our practice, of our virtue, So that's the unwavering Vajra. The second one is called the unabashed Vajra, or the unembarrassed Vajra. And this is the Vajra that renounces praise, fame, the mind that renounces praise, fame, honor, possessions. But more importantly, it is the mind that is immune to others' criticism. It's specifically meaning others' criticism of your Dharma practice, right? A lot of these teachings, they say, if you actually practice the Lojong teachings completely, everyday people will look at you and think you're a crazy person, because the practice of mind training is so wildly different than what we've come to expect of our worldly life, right? So worldly Dharma is so backwards compared to mind training and to spiritual practice that if you actually live a spiritual life that doesn't have attachment to external things, everyone will look at you like you're a crazy person, right? And so being immune to their criticism, that's what this means. That doesn't mean you can do whatever you want and call it Dharma, but it means that if you're actually practicing Dharma and your family members or your friends, they say, what do you mean you don't want these nice things? What do you mean? And they criticize you for it. That won't cause you to lose faith in your practice. Right?
So you have a conviction.
It's conviction, yeah. But here it's called the unabashed Dharma, that you're, and again, proud is a difficult word to use, but you are convict, you have a conviction in your practice, in the validity of it, and you aren't swayed by others' criticism of you, right? And this also, you have to remember, everyone in this room, we're all convert Buddhists, right? So we have family members who aren't Buddhist who might criticize our practice. This is talking about in Buddhist societies where other Buddhists would be criticizing you, because other Buddhists are still living a worldly life. And just because they understand the Dharma doesn't mean that they are, living a spiritual life, right? So this isn't even about other religious or other cultures criticizing you. It's recognizing that worldly people and the priorities of worldly people are not the same as the priorities that we should be adopting as people who are engaging in spiritual practice, right? And that by focusing our lives on a spiritual practice, we open ourselves up to criticism from worldly people. And so we should not let their criticism deter us. Now, that isn't to say if you have Dharma friends who are also engaging in this practice and they give you criticism, right? That's valid. It's worth looking at that criticism and saying, maybe I'm not practicing in a meaningful way. Maybe I've confused myself, maybe something like this. So it's not saying that you should ignore all criticism all the time, but it's saying that when worldly people criticize your practice because you're not engaging in what they perceive to be the right way to live their life, which is one that focuses on external means of happiness, right? That one that is prioritizing self-cherishing. That is a criticism. You shouldn't let it bother you. So the fact that the Kadamba Geshes can be totally immune to that kind of criticism is their jewel of the unwavering Vajra. Excuse me, the unabashed Vajra. And then the last of the three Vajras is called the wisdom Vajra. And this is conviction in the Dharma. So this one is kind of the most important because this one is saying that I am confident that this Dharma practice is valid, that this Dharma practice is leading me to liberation, that is leading me to develop the tools and the wisdom to be of service to others. And that conviction is what lets everything else be easier, right? If you don't have conviction that this is a valid spiritual practice, then it's hard to develop any of the other aspects, right? If I don't believe this is valid, then when I say, well, they say that you shouldn't be attached to worldly things, but I don't really know if that's true or not, then of course you're not going to develop a mind that tries to avoid that attachment, right? So the wisdom Dharma, the wisdom Vajra is the mind that has conviction and confidence in the Dharma and avoids discouragement. And that I think of as like the foundational practice. Being discouraged, yeah. So those are the three Vajras. So now we've gone through 7 of the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampas. It depends on the context, but it can be, definitely. If my discouragement says that my practice isn't good enough, and therefore what's the point? Then yeah, that's definitely a type of laziness, right? Or if it's the discouragement that says like this Dharma teaching is too complicated, I'm never going to understand it, therefore I'm not going to bother, that's a type of laziness as well. Yes, we'd call discouragement a mental factor. Again, discouragement is probably similar to regret. I don't even know what word I translate as discouragement in Tibetan, but it's similar to regret is that if you're discouraged with samsara, then that's a beneficial thing, right? When you're discouraged with Dharma, then that is negative. So discouragement itself is only virtuous or non-virtuous depending on its object, right? So we want to be discouraged with samsara. We don't want to be discouraged in our practice, even when it's difficult, and discouraged in the Dharma itself, especially when it's difficult. Yeah. So
maybe discouragement, but you can say, I'm not there yet. There's no point in myself to say, get to this beggar of death situation.
Well, so the idea, right, is that if you develop this actual wisdom Vajra, you wouldn't have that mind of discouragement. But since we're in the practice of trying to develop that, exactly as you say, when you have that mind of discouragement, then you don't let yourself define yourself by that discouragement. You recognize it, and then you see that that discouragement isn't helping you, right? So then you say, okay, I'm not where I want to be, but instead of letting that hold me back, I just recognize that, and then I don't let that become a discouraging factor that causes me to stall my practice in any way, right? So we do experience discouragement because we're still practicing, but the whole point is to recognize that and say that discouragement isn't helping me, right? And so instead, when I notice that I'm not where I want to be in terms of my practice or in terms of anything else, instead of letting that hold me back, I accept that I'm doing the best I can. Then I identify if there are places I can do better. And then if I am confident that I'm doing the best I can with the resources I have available to me at the time, then that discouragement won't arise because I'll have subverted it, right? And I'll have transformed it into motivation to practice in a more meaningful way. So then we have the 4 entrustments, right? We entrust our innermost mind to Dharma, Dharma to the beggar, beggar to death, and death to the cave. And then we have the 3 Vajras, the unwavering Vajra, the unabashed or unembarrassed Vajra, and the wisdom Vajra. And then the last 3 are the 3 actions with regard to rank, we say. Rank, R-A-N-K. R-A-N-K. So the first one is, we want to remove ourselves from the rank of humans. And what this means is, we want to remove ourselves from someone following worldly delights, right? So you see there's a lot of repetition here, but that's okay. The whole point is we need to have a confident mind that understands it from all directions. So by abandoning the 8 worldly concerns, we're removing ourselves from the rank of humans. That's what it means.
Isn't this Lojong practice supposed to be practiced for lay people and ordinary people living a lay life and to have powerful progress by the students of Dharma?
Yeah.
You remove yourself from the next shanties.
Well, this is say, right? So abandoning the 8 worldly concerns is what it means to remove yourself from the rank of humans. So you can do that and still live a lay life, right? Right.
Inwardly or
Yeah, this is all inner practice, you know. Now, a lot of the examples we have of like the people that we look up to as like the pillars of this kind of practice were all these like ascetic monks who are doing it in their actual outward life as well. But the practice is an inner practice, right? So removing yourself, I mean, like, it makes it more clear with the next one. So we remove ourselves from the rank of humans, which means we abandon the 8 worldly concerns and we strive to reach the rank of dogs. Okay. And I will say this is a very romantic, this is a very romantic idea of dogs. I don't know this. I mean, obviously, this idea of dogs came from India, so it's not just a Tibetan idea. But what it means to strive to achieve the rank of a dog is the idea that if you have a dog, right, that dog, no matter how much abuse you like give that dog, it's always loyal to its master, right? So in the same way, we should develop great patience in response to harm. And when we experience harm, that shouldn't cause us to have discouragement or anger in our minds, right? So we should develop strong patience in response to harm. And in the same way, we say that dogs are always loyal to their master and they're always loyal to their herd and to their pack, and they are good at herding animals. So in that same way, we want to always work for the benefit of others, the way dogs do. That they're always part of a pack and they're always doing the benefit of whatever their master requests of them. And then we also want to be willing to give away our body and life for others in the way that dogs would sacrifice their life to defend their home or to defend their master, that we should be willing to give away our body, our life, our goods, all of our things to benefit others. Now, again, that's a very romantic idea of dogs. I don't know if dogs actually exist in that way, but anyway, that's the idea, right? Is that we want to be... Oh, it's similar. I mean, there's a lot of overlap. But so we want to be able to endure hardship and develop patience. We want to be able to always work for the benefit of others. And we want to be able or willing to give away, you know, even our life and our wellness and not just our possessions in order to serve and benefit others. And supposedly those are actions that are similar to dogs. So we want to strive to achieve the rank of a dog. Now, if that's not your experience of dogs, I apologize, but we understand the meaning, right? And then the last one is, so we removed ourselves from humans, we're striving for the rank of dogs, but you actually achieve the rank of the devas, or the gods. And what that means is, by practicing in this way, by developing this mind of contentment, you become an object of veneration due to your virtuous conduct and your practices of austerity. So that's what it means to have the rank of a god or a deva, is that your conduct is so virtuous that you become an object of veneration, right? So that's not what you're striving for. You're not striving for others to venerate you, but you're striving to embody a type of virtuous practice that is worthy of veneration. That's the important part. If you're seeking out others' veneration, then that's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. But if you're seeking out to live a virtuous life, and therefore your virtuous conduct and your austerity, which again is an inner practice, doesn't mean giving up your things, that becomes itself an object of veneration. So that is what it means to achieve the rank of a god. Yeah, so this is just like an example, right? We don't want to be reborn as a god. The human birth is the most productive one to engage in practice. Yeah, the rank of a god is to say that you are worthy of veneration. And the reason you're worthy of veneration isn't because you're popular or famous or wealthy, but because your life is imbued with a type of virtuous conduct and austerity or asceticism, internal asceticism, not external necessarily, that is worthy of veneration. So that is the goal, right? Is that rank. So these 10 innermost jewels are these 10 mindsets or attitudes that are what make the Kadampa Geshes wealthy, right? And they all point towards abandoning worldly concerns and adopting a spiritual life. And what that means is recognizing that worldly concerns are all concerns that are circling around our self-cherishing mind. And so by circumventing, not just circumventing, but upending the self-cherishing mind, then we break ourselves out of our habits, of our status quo, and we can then adopt an actual spiritual practice and find ourselves wealthy in the same way. Okay, so I think the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampas is a really useful way to think about the 8 worldly concerns and self-cherishing. Because if these are the things that they hold precious, like these are the things that help define them as practitioners, it's useful to think about it. They're like the fuel that keeps them moving on the path, right? Okay, so from there, let's actually start this text. So this text, the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland, is composed by Atisha. Now, this text exists on its own in the Tengyur, right? The collection of all of the teachings of the Indian masters and commentaries. It exists like it has its own entry, but it's also within a letter that Atisha wrote to a Bengali king, and like the verses are mixed into that letter. And so a lot of contemporary scholars believe that Dromtonpa extracted the verses and put it together. And so it was Dromtonpa's responsibility to take these verses and kind of consolidate it. So the likelihood of Atisha actually speaking this text, these verses directly, is, questionable. But they're all verses, a teaching he gave in a more extensive way. And if we get to it today, I will read a little bit from this text. So if you have a chance, so the Book of Kadam, right, the core teachings or the core texts, it has 2 main sections. And the first one is called the Father Teachings. And so the Father Teachings, the first text in here that is included is called A Tree of Faith, a self-exhortation. And this is a text by Dromtonpa. It's a short prayer encouraging him to practice, right? And then you have Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland, and then the Jewel Garland of Dialogues, it's called. And like I said, that is, let's see how many, 400 pages long, and it's a commentary on this. But it is composed as if it were an actual dialogue between Dromtonpa and Atisha. And it's delightful. It is one of the most hilarious texts I've ever read. And if we get a chance to, I'll read you some bits of it, because it's literally Dromtong and Atisha going back and forth, and every once in a while making fun of each other. There's one point where Tara shows up and she has like nectar for them. And like, she's like, you're all laughing and making jokes. I want to have fun too. She's like, here, I brought you refreshments. And you're like, what is going on? It is wild. It is like one of the most amazing texts I've ever read, because it shows this relationship between student and teacher that you don't often see, right? That there is this friendliness between them, that they lived together, they took care of each other. And even though Dromtonpa was deeply devoted to Atisha, Atisha recognized Dromtonpa's good qualities, and they make fun of each other, and they poke at each other. There's one point where Atisha says something about the limits of space. It's as vast as the limits of space. And Dromtonpa is like, well, I thought space was measureless. So how can it be the same as the limits of space? And then Atisha says something back and forth. It's really a wild, wild text. So if we get a chance, I'll read a little bit of it, but I do highly recommend you reading if you get a chance. If you're interested in other mind training texts, like I said, there is another book that's the same size as this. They've also published a book that's it's called Mind Training, the Great Collection. That is the larger collection. They made a condensed version that's a paperback that is like half of the text only. The ones that Thupten Jinpa feels are like most critical. So there's also a paperback version of the Mind Training collection that is like half of the ones in the big version. But so it's useful to understand that this practice, the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland, is given as a series of advice. And ultimately, what it is identifying, and this is kind of, I don't know, a spoiler, but in the end, if you were to look at the 25th verse of 26, it talks about the 7 riches of the Aryas, right? And we might get to, that's mentioned twice. But so this whole text is an expansion of the 7 riches of the Aryas, which we'll get to. If not today, then definitely in the next 2 classes. Okay. But so this text is again recognizing that these are these 7 principles that are incredibly valuable for our practice. And this is the way these 7 principles play out in different aspects of our life. So we start with the Sanskrit title, which is Bodhisattva Manivali. And in Tibetan, that is the Tantrasabhagi Rinchen Chama. So homage to great compassion starts with paying homage not to the Buddha of compassion, but to compassion itself, which is something you see in a lot of these texts. Okay. And then it goes on to say homage to the teachers and homage to the faith divinities. So Atisha famously had 4 different Buddha practices, tantric practices that he engaged in. Only 4. We see many, how many hundreds of different Buddhas, right, that we see. Atisha practiced meditating on Shakyamuni Buddha and on Tara and on Avalokiteshvara and on Arapachana. Arapachana is a wrathful emanation of Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. And those are the only 4 that he practiced, his 4 yidams, right? And, for us, I think that's really motivating because we see it can be so overwhelming, all these different Buddhas and empowerments and tantric initiations. But he was like, no, these are the only 4, right? So he starts out by paying homage to them. And that helps locate this as that even though this text is entirely sutra material, this isn't a tantric practice, the reason he starts out with that motivation or that homage is because, Atisha says that the apex of Buddhist practice is tantric practice. But in order to make yourself an appropriate vessel to engage in tantra, you have to practice mind training and you have to practice sutra. Like this is what allows you to accumulate the 2 accumulations, right, of wisdom and merit that then make you a suitable vessel or suitable practitioner that is able to use tantric practice in a meaningful way. So if you don't do the work ahead of time, tantric practice is meaningless, right? The higher types of meditative practices and the higher types of yogas are meaningless if you haven't done the work to accumulate wisdom and merit, which means if you haven't done the work to get rid of your self-cherishing mind, then it doesn't matter, right? Then it's all just for show. So even though this text has nothing to do with Tantra in the teaching, it recognizes that engaging in highest yoga tantra practice is the apex that allows you to become Buddha in this very life. But in order for that to work, you have to do this first, right? So it's helping locate the importance of our practice, of our ability to generate merit and wisdom through our practice of the Sutra vehicle. So we start. I'm going to give commentary kind of in the same way it's broken up here in the commentary by Atisha. So the first 2 lines, discard all lingering doubts and strive with dedication in your practice. Yeah. So what this means is, I think it's important to recognize we're starting with discard all doubts, which is to say discard doubts regarding the validity of the teachings and also the validity of the teacher giving you the teachings. Discard all doubts that a spiritual practice that abandons worldly life is not meaningful, right? And strive with dedication in your practice is recognizing that ordinary beings, Atisha says, ordinary beings compete to see what they can do faster, receive a teaching or give it up, right? We need to strive for our practice to be steadfast and to be committed, which might mean we take it slowly, right? It might mean we don't bite off more than we can chew at a moment, that we have a goal and we're always moving towards that goal. But ordinary beings, that isn't their practice. So we strive with dedication means that we discard all doubts that even if this is hard and even if this is something that I can't implement 100% in my life right now, I don't doubt that this is a valid teaching. The idea of my worldly attachment causing only suffering. Discard all doubts about that, right? And once you discard doubts and you have some conviction, then it makes all of your practice much stronger. Like we said before, if you have these doubts that this practice may not be applicable to your life or may not be 100% accurate, how can you actually practice it with your whole body, with your whole mind?
This is not doubts about the Dharma. Doubts about the validity of the 8 conditions.
Both. It's both. I mean, it's doubts about the Dharma in the sense that the Dharma teaches the 8 worldly concerns are cause only suffering and no happiness, right? So if you don't believe, so that's what it means, right? It also is specifically is talking about doubts that practicing Dharma, including practicing Tantra, will not bring you to Buddhahood, and doubts that all the teachings of the Buddha, including Tantra, can be included within the three baskets of teachings, right? So all the Buddhist teachings, we often categorize them as three: the Vinaya teachings, the Sutra teachings, and the Abhidharma teachings, right? And that all the teachings can be categorized as those three, which then also relate to three higher trainings: the higher trainings of morality, the higher training of concentration, and the higher training of wisdom, right? And so even these teachings, these Lojong teachings, which are from a whole different perspective, that are focused on uprooting the self-cherishing mind, discarding the doubts that these aren't valid teachings that come from the Buddha himself and are contained in all in the three Pitakas of the Buddhist teachings, and they aren't, they don't comprise the three higher trainings as well, right? So that's what it means to discard doubts. And as we always say, in all the teachings of the Buddha, is that to discard doubts doesn't mean to just blindly believe that because I've said it, but that when a teacher gives you this instruction, at least have conviction that the teacher is someone you trust and you believe in, and using that level of conviction, then you investigate on your own, and that develops a stronger type of conviction, right? So your conviction is through your own experience, through your experience in the practice, and through your observation of teachers who teach this practice. So it's not a blind kind of faith. And this goes with, this can go with the next two lines as well. Thoroughly relinquish sloth, mental dullness, and laziness, and strive with joyful perseverance. So right at the beginning of our practice, a teacher's reminding us we need to put in effort because it's hard. Like if it was easy, we wouldn't have the teaching on perseverance be first, right? Because it's not easy. Because we live in samsara and we've lived with these habits for so many lifetimes that it's very difficult to break free of those habits. So it's going to take effort. So he reminds us of that right in the beginning. The same teaching is when you try to achieve single-pointed concentration, we say there are 5 obstacles and 8 antidotes to achieving single-pointed concentration, right? Achieving shine or shamatha, right? So of the 5 obstacles, what's the first one?
Getting the instructions,
That's the second one.
not having motivation.
Kind of.
Wanting to get into the study.
These are all pointing in the right direction. The first obstacle is laziness, right? The first obstacle is laziness, and then forgetting the instruction, and then excitement or agitation and dullness, and then over application or under application of the antidotes. So the first one is laziness, and laziness has 4 antidotes, right? So what are the 4 antidotes to laziness? That's the third one. So they go in order. So first is faith or conviction that this is actually a beneficial practice. And then from that faith or conviction, then you develop aspiration. So the wish or the intention to practice. And then from that, you develop perseverance. And then we say mental pliancy, which is the actual antidote to laziness is pliancy, but that comes as a result of perseverance or effort, really. Effort, perseverance, same thing in this context. So even if you want to achieve calm abiding, which is not necessarily even a Buddhist practice, right? We recognize that right at the beginning, laziness is our first and biggest obstacle. And the way we overcome that, to some extent, is just persevering, exerting effort, actually doing the work. So that's true for almost all spiritual practice. And so the teacher is reminding us that this is not easy. It is going to be taxing. It is going to challenge what you expect of the world. And so develop conviction, right? Discard all doubts that this isn't an accurate teaching. Discard all doubts that this teaching doesn't apply to you for some reason. And from that sense of conviction, then you develop the aspiration that you want to engage in this practice. You recognize that it's beneficial, even if it's difficult, that it will lead you to liberation for yourself, and it'll give you the tools to benefit others. It'll lead you to happiness in this life and to happiness in all future lives, to the eventual happiness of Buddhahood. So once you develop that conviction and that aspiration to practice, then you have to exert the effort and recognize that it's going to be an uphill battle, right? And you don't let yourself be discouraged. So it's not to turn us away from practice, it's to prepare us, right? To say that this isn't going to be easy, that's okay. You're going to slide backwards, right? So that's what he's teaching in this first verse. That mind training itself is a difficult practice. And it's easy. So we need to relinquish sloth, mental dullness, and laziness, right? If we think how incredibly fortunate we are to have a perfect human rebirth, if we really understand that, then we look at our discouragement or our laziness, and we would look at that laziness as if it was a crazy person, you know? Like, it's like we are sitting here with our heads on fire, but we're not putting the fire out. Why would we ever engage in that practice? To have this perfect human rebirth is so rare, then to let ourselves succumb to laziness or to torpor of any way is ridiculous, right? So we need to relinquish sloth, mental dullness, and laziness. And so one of the ways we can do that is by meditating on a perfect human rebirth, because that perfect human rebirth can inspire us to realize how incredibly fortunate we are, right? And so that's one of the ways that we can see this attempt of uprooting our self-cherishing mind and our practicing of the meditative topics as taught in the Lamrim work together, right? They're not they're not two different Dharma practices. They're integrated. We recognize that we meditate on perfect human rebirth because that helps us get rid of sloth or laziness, right? It encourages us to engage even in mindfulness practice, because that mindfulness practice then trains our minds to look at a topic in a more meaningful way and to not be discouraged. And that segues into the next verse. With mindfulness, vigilance, and conscientiousness, constantly guard the gateways of your senses. Again and again, 3 times both day and night, examine the flow of your thoughts. So here we've talked about mindfulness, right? So what is mindfulness? Specifically. So that is the general understanding of mindfulness, right? But when you're trying to develop calm abiding, what do we speak of? Is we talk about mindfulness and vigilance are the two we talk about. Vigilance is sometimes called awareness or meta-awareness. What is the distinction between those two?
Vigilance gets you back to what you were concentrating on.
Okay.
And mindfulness alerts you when you have wondered.
Mindfulness is staying on the.
You have them backwards. So mindfulness it's really easy when you know the Tibetan or even the Sanskrit. The Tibetan is drenpa, which means memory. So mindfulness is remembering the object that you're focused on. Remembering the object of your meditation. And awareness or meta-awareness or vigilance is the one that alerts you when your attention has drifted, right? So you had the right idea, but you had them backwards. So it'd be smrti. Smrti would be mindfulness. Smrti. I'm not sure what the other one is in Sanskrit. Sheshan in Tibetan, I don't know. It's drenpa that's really easy because literally the word for memory is drenshe, like a mind of memory. So drenpa, mindfulness, and you're like, oh, clearly it means remembering. And so when we were talking about the 5 obstacles to achieving calm abiding, the second one is forgetting the instruction, and the remedy to forgetting is drenpa, is mindfulness, right? Because you're remembering the object of meditation. So here we say with mindfulness, so that is focus on your object of meditation, and vigilance, which is awareness when your mind is distracted and recognizing that your mind is distracted, and conscientiousness. So what is conscientiousness in this regard? It is making sure your action is in line, your actions of body and mind are in line or concordant with your aspirations, right? So one of the ways these are discussed is that mindfulness in this regard helps you or ensures that you don't lose your visualization. So here in this specific practice, in this commentary, he's giving commentary on it he's describing to Dromtonpa a practice we do when we take refuge, where you visualize in the space in front of you, you dissolve everything into emptiness, then you visualize a lotus, and on top of the lotus is your teacher, in this case, a Tisha, and then that should be the size of a barley seed. And then at a Tisha's heart, you visualize Shakyamuni Buddha, and then at Shakyamuni Buddha's heart, you visualize Tara, and at Tara's heart, you visualize Avalokiteshvara, And Avalokiteshvara's heart, you visualize Adapachina. And that's called the 5 drops. You know, a couple of years ago, His Holiness gave an initiation of the 5 drop of the Kadampa drops at Tashi Lumpo, and it's related to this practice, right?
The last of the junction.
Yeah, he gave it a couple of years ago. But so here he's saying that with mindfulness, vigilance, and conscientiousness, so in your meditation, when you want to take refuge and you want to make requests to your teachers and requests to all the Buddhas, you engage in this you engage in this practice where you're recognizing the indistinction, or the indivisibility between your teacher and Lama Atisha. That for us, for Jamtompa, his teacher is Lama Atisha, but for us, our own teacher and Lama Atisha, so the father of this lineage of practice, with Shakyamuni Buddha, with the Buddha of compassion, the Buddha of compassionate action, and the Buddha of wrathful wisdom, right? We're saying that they're indivisible, and we take refuge in them as the Buddha jewel. And so we don't lose that visualization. That's what it means to have mindfulness regarding that visualization. And then our vigilance, or our meta-awareness, it takes whatever we're focused on and it makes it more firm, right? And then our conscientiousness is then, once you have a visualization of the Buddhas in front, you cultivate respect. You venerate them in a meaningful way. So when you're engaging in even, going for refuge and you recite the refuge prayer, you should be engaging in a visualization of the Buddhas in front of you, right? Or at your heart, or depending on your practice. But you shouldn't, it's not just empty words. When you say, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha, you're saying, I'm going to refuge to the Buddha who is embodied by my teacher, and I actually am trying to visualize, right? So it's not just like pleasant words. You're really trying to develop a direct connection. And so this can help us. They say that, Atisha says rather, that mindfulness in this regard helps motivate our practice, and vigilance helps sustain our practice, and conscientiousness or heedfulness helps make our practice, our actions, and our intention chunpa, concordant. So in that way, our practice is motivated and sustained, and then our actions of body and our aspirations are of the same flavor through our practice of mindfulness and vigilance and conscientiousness. Now here, when it says 3 times both day and night, that really does mean at least 6 times a day you should be practicing, doing this meditation practice. You like to think that it's like a euphemism, and then the commentary is like, no, you divide the day into these 6 sections, and at least once during every section, you should be doing this practice. And you're like, oh, okay, it's not a euphemism. It is literal. But for me, obviously, we always try to find ways around it, There's the 6-session Guru Yoga that we're supposed to practice if you practice highest yoga tantra. And the 6-session Guru Yoga is a meditative practice that allows you to fulfill all of your commitments. And hypothetically, it's called 6-session Guru Yoga because you're supposed to do it 6 times, 6 sessions throughout the day. But then we're taught, well, if you recite this many times in this verse, this many times, and you can do it once in the morning and once in the night, and it really combines to count as 6. So we're always trying to find shortcuts. We live busy lives. And so those shortcuts, when they are, valid and authorized by our teachers, are okay. But ideally, it's worth remembering that in an ideal practice, we wouldn't be taking these kind of shortcuts, So the idea of doing practice 6 times a day, it seems like wild. Like, who would have time to do that? But ideally, we should, So it's good to hold that in mind. And then you say, okay, I can't do that. Like, I can't find 6 times throughout the day to engage in this practice. But I can find 6 times in the day to at least do like a minute of contemplative practice, right? I could take I could set a timer every couple of hours and just take a 2-minute break to do some sort of contemplative practice. Like, we can do that, even though how crazy busy our lives are, we can all probably do that. So then we can at least try to point in the right direction. Now here, when it says examine the flow of your thoughts, what you're examining for, obviously, if you're just trying to develop mindfulness, then you're examining whenever your attention is distracted, obviously. Whenever you're telling yourself a story and you're lost. But here, what you're also looking for is when, especially you're engaging in this refuge practice and you're entreating the Buddhas for their blessings and for their inspiration. You're examining when is there a chance when your mind of refuge is not solid, that you don't actually look to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and your teachers as a source of refuge? When is your mind of refuge really just empty words? So in your practice, you should examine your flow of thoughts to see, am I really looking to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the triple gem, as a source of refuge? Or am I just saying that? Because if I really take the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as refuge, with the Dharma being the ultimate refuge, then how could I be engaging in these other actions that seem so contradictory to what the Buddha taught? Right? If I'm really taking them as refuge, then I wouldn't be doing these things. So that should inspire you to say, okay, I need to help make my actions in line with what I actually believe. You're also examining your mind to see what kind of doubts might get in the way of your practice. So when if you've given up your practice because you don't feel like it's working fast enough, or you don't feel like you're good enough, examine what are your reasons for practice and for non-practice. And you're examining if there are doubts there that are getting in the way. So when you examine your mind, you're looking, when you reach the idea of refuge, you're looking for doubts that are causing obstacles to your practice. You're looking for instances when you have been overcome by sloth or laziness or mental agitation in any way, mental dullness. You're analyzing your mind for when you've given into your attachment to desire, when you have given into looking for happiness or believing that happiness existed outside of you. You're examining the flow of your thoughts for when your pursuit of others' welfare has been partial, when your self-cherishing mind has been more powerful than your mind that cherishes others. So this is the kind of practice that I often advocate, right? That in the end of the day, you should go through your activities and see how many of my activities did I do with the Dharma mind? How many of the things that I went about my day-to-day was actually a Dharma practice, and how much of it was a worldly practice? So this is not the exact same practice, but it's the same idea, that you should be analyzing the flow of your thought, because especially at the beginning, we don't have that instant realization, right? That we still succumb to worldly thoughts because we're worldly samsaric beings, especially at this stage in our practice. So actually analyze your flow of thoughts. Don't just assume that since I believe this to be true, once I sit down and practice it, it's going to happen. Actually analyze and be honest in reflecting your own practice. So the next two verses we can talk about. Yeah, we have time. Reveal your own shortcomings, but do not seek out others' errors.
Isn't it the first Bodhisattva vow?
What do you mean this verse or the whole text, or what do you mean?
No, the first verse. Third verse.
I mean, yes, it is. I mean, it's also similar to a number of mind training teachings. You have this thing often, right? Like this is the example that's often given is, so here it says, reveal your own shortcomings, but do not seek out others' errors. Conceal your own good qualities, but proclaim those good qualities of others. And this is summarized as we said before, putting all blame on a single point. The single point being self-cherishing or self-grasping, depending on how you want to talk about it, right? And the example they often give is that you should consider the faults of others to be like grains of sand in your hand, and your own faults like grains of sand in your eye. So, right? So a single grain of sand in your eye is much more painful than 1,000 grains of sand in your hand, right? So you should be much more concerned with identifying your own faults and your own mistakes than the mistakes of others, because identifying others' mistakes isn't going to benefit your mind. Now, I will say in my practice, never mind my practice, it's my life. The things that I see others that I get most frustrated about often are things that I do myself, right? I see my own bad behavior reflected in others, and then that frustrates me, right? So sometimes I think seeing faults in others can be useful insofar as you recognize that it's actually a mirror for your own faults that you are frustrated with. But calling them out when they're faults isn't useful. The whole purpose is to realize your own faults, right? Because that's what you can do something about. And, it's interesting. A teacher talks about this in the sense of he points out that self-cherishing is the single point to place all your blame. But if we think of it in terms of self-grasping, then the praise that others may give us or the criticism they may give us are the exact same in the sense of not being truly existent, right? There's no truly existent praise and there's no truly existent shortcomings or faults. So why is it that we hide our faults, but we celebrate our good qualities, when our good qualities and our faults are both the same and not being truly existent, yet we treat them different, right? We want to celebrate one and hide the other. And the reason is, even though they're the same in being non-true existence, our self-cherishing mind says, this is more important and this is less important. Or this is what makes me look like a good person. This is what gives me status in the eyes of others. This is what's going to lead me forward. And therefore, that self-cherishing mind imputes a reality to our shortcomings and our faults. Our shortcomings and our good qualities that isn't really there. Because it treats them as if they were truly existent things. So that's combining the idea of emptiness and the lack of true existence and the recognition that our self-cherishing mind is grasping onto our criticisms and our faults and our good qualities as if they were truly existent. And by grasping onto them as if they were truly existent, that's what causes us to try to hide one and causes us to try to celebrate the other, right? He goes on to say that when you're seeking out the faults of others, that seeker doesn't truly exist either. So what's the purpose of trying to seek it out, right? So it's interesting that in this verse especially, he analyzes it through the view of emptiness. What I think is interesting and is like hard to wrap your mind around is you should celebrate the praise, you should sing the good qualities of others, right? And the reason is people like to hear praise about themselves. It makes them happy. And he notes that's a worldly happiness. That's true. But it is still more powerful and beneficial for you to give other people that happiness by celebrating their good qualities than it is for you to celebrate your own. And if you think that celebrating their good qualities and rejoicing in them and praising them would cause them to inflate their ego or to become, have a harmful ego in some way, then you wouldn't do it. But in general, we say, even though for you don't want others to celebrate your good qualities, you do it quietly, right? But for others, you realize that can make them happy. So it's more important to praise them for the things they do well, right? You don't praise them for worldly qualities. You praise their good qualities in terms of spiritual practice. So you proclaim the good qualities of others while hiding your own good qualities. Hiding doesn't mean you don't nurture them, but you nurture them internally, right? You don't show them off. And what this is coming down to, especially with the next verse, where it says, forsake wealth administrations, at all times relinquish gain and fame, have modest desires and be easily satisfied and reciprocate kindness. It's saying that we need to cultivate contentment, right? We need to cultivate a mind, as we were saying before, that is satisfied with the bare minimum. That's what the Kadampas hold as valuable. When we are satisfied with the bare minimum and realize that we don't have any reason to even expect that in our life, then we don't seek happiness in external wealth or external praise. So having modest desires, obviously we want to do, this isn't to say like sell yourself short. This isn't to say that like don't have big hopes or dreams, but it's to realize that if you're not going to be satisfied unless you have a mansion, then you're never going to be satisfied. You know what I mean? Realize that like you can be happy with the bare minimum. That allows your mind to be content with whatever it gets. And anything above that is like, a cherry on top. It's not necessary, So have modest desires. It's not saying don't appreciate the things around you, but it's saying that you don't tie your happiness to your external things. It's not validated by external things. So you are cultivating a mind of contentment, a mind that is not disturbed when it doesn't have excellent conditions.
It's interesting that it's not saying have no desire.
Yeah, it's not saying don't, you're right. But what it's really saying is don't desire external things to be the cause of your happiness, right? So having modest desires is saying similar to recognizing that you do have some needs, like physical needs, in order to survive in this world. And a lot of us, we'd say we may have emotional needs as well, especially if depending on where we are in our practice, like we may be reliant upon having others in our family or friends who provide like an emotional role to help keep us centered and balanced, right? And ideally, as a Bodhisattva, we can go live in a cave and not need all of that. But right now, that's not where we are. So we do have emotional needs and we do have physical needs. So we recognize that those needs is what it means by the modest desires, is that I desire to have enough things to allow me to continue practicing Dharma and to have a healthy enough body that allows me to continue practicing Dharma and all enough like material conditions that allow me to practice without being an obstacle. So that's what it means by having modest desires.
So the time when austerity practice and so that only one way of balancing the image. And for about 6 years, they went up to big. I mean, you would have to survive, so you have to kind of have some kind of sustenance.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the middle path.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? So Shakyamuni Buddha, do you have a skeletal Buddha here as an example? So, His Holiness often, especially for monks who are studying, monks and nuns who are studying, he recommends having an image of the skeletal Buddha. So the skeletal Buddha is the image of the Buddha after he'd been fasting in the forest for 6 years, eating only a grain of rice a day, when he realized that that was not leading him out of samsara, right? So he stopped and he took, milk curd, and then he cut his hair and took a bath and all these things, and he bathed in the river, in the Naranja. But that skeletal image of him just shows that he was so dedicated to being free from samsara that he's willing to put himself through very difficult austerities. So we should have that same willingness, even though we recognize that isn't the correct method, but the willingness we should have, right? And right now, like I could not do that, but I'm trying, I try to develop that willingness. Yeah, that's right. We saw one at Osalaram, that's true. And so very quickly, just to end this verse, when we say reciprocate kindness, what this is referencing is the kindness of all sentient beings who have been our parents in all past lives, right? That's what it's talking about. So when we talk about generating bodhicitta, right, we often say, recognize that all sentient beings have been your mother. In this text, he actually talks about how all sentient beings have been both of our parents. He references them as our father and our mother and our grandparents and our siblings. He doesn't just say mother. Because he's not teaching just generating bodhicitta. He's just teaching about the reality that we've lived so many lives and so many relationships, and they've been kind to us in so many ways. And so the way we repay the kindness of our teachers is by engaging in practice. And the way we repay the kindness of our parents, which is to say all sentient beings, is we try to bring about joy for them in this life, which is one of the practices, for instance, is the 4 immeasurable practices is advised, right? By generating a mind of the 4 immeasurables, which we recite as one of our preliminary prayers. That's one of the way you reciprocate kindness to your dear parents, who are all sentient beings. But ultimately, it is by developing the mind of bodhicitta and developing a firm mind of bodhicitta that is always working for their happiness, both their worldly happiness and their supramundane happiness. So that's what it means to reciprocate kindness, is to, as you can see, the first 2 lines of the next verse, cultivate love and compassion and stabilize your awakening mind, right? That's what it means to cultivate kindness towards other sentient beings, is to generate minds of love and compassion, as well as immeasurable joy and immeasurable equanimity. So the 4 immeasurables, and based in those 4 immeasurables, develop bodhicitta and make that bodhicitta stable and not wavering. And that's how we reciprocate kindness. And I think it's interesting that that is paired in this verse with our own getting rid of our own developing a mind of contentment, right? So it says by developing a mind of contentment is how you kind of put out the fires of your own desire, and then you have all this energy left by having doused the inner flame that was burning so hot. You focus that on others and on their happiness. So instead of seeking out your own happiness, you realize that I don't need all these things to make me happy. I just need the bare minimum. And so that energy that you've tamped down on, you focus it on others and say, okay, I'm going to use that energy to generate a mind of love or compassion, and let that love and compassion develop into bodhicitta, which I then stabilize through repeat practice, right? So I think it's interesting that here, attachment and your own worldly attachment to external wealth, to praise, to compliments, to these things is paired with, by getting rid of that, you're creating space in your mind to then focus on others. Okay. I guess I'll leave it there because it is 7. Are there any questions for our discussion today? I didn't get a chance to. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'll read those in a moment. I did want to. So the next 2 lines are about basically always develop faith in karma and relinquish the 10 negative actions, right? So it's teaching on karma. And I'll leave talking about that to next week. Venerable Gachi will be here next week to talk about that. But I wanted to share in his commentary, just to show how hilarious and great this text is. This is, I'm sorry. When I read this the first time, I couldn't believe that this is a Dharma text. And I remember I remember sitting in my apartment in Cambridge and being like, this isn't real. Like, what am I reading? So Atisha gives this teaching on the 10 non-virtues, and he goes through all of them, right? And where is it? Okay, so he goes through them pretty quickly, right? And then he says, Gyewa Jumne. So Gyewa Jumne is another name for Dromtopa. He says, Gyewa Jumne, do you know this? Anger destroys the roots of virtue of many eons. Conceitedness destroys the young shoots of the cultivation of heedfulness. Raw livelihood causes one to degrade the qualities of a virtuous person. Therefore, Drom, one must never commit any acts that are associated with the 10 non-virtues. This broad presentation of the ethics of the 10 virtues is part of a dialogue carried out in a casual manner by the 2 of us. It is not time for discussing the numerous conflicts and connections between these explanations. So, Drom, do you find these explanations agreeable to your mind? And Drom Tompa says, earlier, Drom Tompa requests these teachings, and he's like, it's not that I don't think I have any worry about these, but, for my students. So they have this, it's very, very funny. But then he goes, even though we would not have the time to engage in an extensive dialogue, it would certainly be fine if you, Atisha, were to give an excellent explanation that is comprehensive and extensive, that is lucid and substantive on all the aspects of the story of these 10 non-virtues. But then Atisha says, Jerome, it is not that I don't know how to weave the words together. It is not the case that I have explained these things here only in relation to your mind. What would it be like if I were to explain it in Sanskrit? That would serve no purpose. None of you Tibetans would ever understand it. Furthermore, this approach is like that of a mother teaching her little child how to eat, how to dress, how to behave. This is not the occasion where I must avoid the flaw of repeating myself over and over again. Jerome, if the people of Tibet were to come in my presence and ask for an instruction that is beneficial to their minds, how would it be if I were to give the following teaching? And then he gives this very esoteric teaching. Then it includes lines like, joyful will it be if you rob your afflictions. Joyful will it be if you steal the ultimate, which is not given. So it's like a hard to understand teaching. And at the end of these verses, he says, Jerome, although I've expounded this without any embellishment, such as composing this in Sanskrit, how would any people even understand this level of composition? Conversation is conversation and poetry is poetry. You Tibetans, even if you were to compose for many months, you would never be able to produce this kind of verse. You'd think that I'd had to memorize this and then just recited them. Saying this, he laughed. I'm sorry, maybe that's not amusing to you. That is the most hilarious thing I've ever read in Dharma text ever. You're like, this, how is this Dharma teaching? I love it because it really shows the relationship between a student and a teacher is an intimate relationship, right? And we have nothing but respect for our teachers. Obviously, we see them as Buddhas or as similar to Buddhas, as embodying the good qualities of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And yet you can develop a relationship where they understand how to teach you in an appropriate way. And for me, the Book of Kadam, especially this dialogue between Drompa Tompa and Atisha, while it is giving really powerful teachings on mind training, it also is highlighting the joy that comes from this practice. The joy that we get by being part of this tradition.
That student asked one of the Dalai Lamas, when will I be born? And he's born with a cow with one.
Yeah. This is what's the I don't remember the story, but His Holiness tells it a few times. A cow with a blue horn or something, right? I mean, you see with His Holiness too, he's always making fun of people, always joking. The few times I've had direct contact with His Holiness, direct conversation. Almost every time he's made fun of me. And Lama Zopa too. I remember once I was in His Holiness during the Lamrim teachings at Sarah. His Holiness had a special audience with like Tibetans that came from Tibet. And so it was in the Sarah main temple, and there was maybe a few hundred Tibetans there. And I had to give His Holiness a microphone. So I went to give him his microphone. and he asked me my name and then what I was studying, something like this. And he asked me in English, but I answered in Tibetan. And then he said, "Oh, you speak Tibetan well." And I said, "No, I don't really understand Tibetan that well." And then he just laughed. He's like, "If you don't understand Tibetan," very loud, so everyone could hear, not just me, everyone could hear with the microphone on. "If you don't understand Tibetan, then how can you even debate?" And then he just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I'm like, "Oh, yes, that's great." And then he just, laughs very gently and kind of does that. So he's always poking, right? Like, and you see that this is a joyful practice, even though this practice is difficult. This practice is asking a lot of us, right? It's saying that all the things so far in your life you've accepted as being the measures of your success and your happiness, those are only causing suffering for you. That is a heavy thing to say. Yet there's joy in this practice. There's joy in every moment of this practice if we open ourselves up to it. And so a text like this reminds me of that it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all you're doing everything backwards. It's that you can do this really hard practice. It's going to ask a lot of you, and you can be happy the whole time you're doing it. You can experience joy with your Dharma brothers and sisters, your Dharma siblings, and with your teachers. That there is a lot of happiness to be had here. And that is what we're trying to cultivate, is this sense of happiness that isn't dependent on external things, but dependent on our minds, our spiritual practice. Okay, so really quickly, the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampas are the 4 entrustments. So we entrust our innermost mind to the Dharma. We entrust our innermost Dharma to the beggar. We entrust our innermost beggar to death. And we entrust our innermost death to the cave. So those are the 4 entrustments. Then the 3 Vajras are the unwavering Vajra, the unabashed Vajra, and the wisdom Vajra. And then the 3 actions with regard to rank are abandoning the rank of humans, striving for the rank of a dog, and achieving the rank of a god. Okay? Okay, let's call it an evening. We didn't get to very much of this, but that's okay. You have 2 more classes to go over it. And so I hope this was helpful. And this is all kind of a prelude for us to get into the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, which we'll do after our break. Let's finish this evening by setting a strong dedication. Recognize that our practice today, our exploration of the mind training teachings, has accumulated some sort of merit. And so instead of keeping this merit for ourselves, we dedicate that this merit may ripen on other sentient beings, that all sentient beings might experience the bliss of Buddhahood, that those who are suffering may be free from their suffering, that those who have passed away may achieve perfect human rebirths, quickly meet with Mahayana virtuous friend. For all those who have prayed to us and requested our assistance, may they achieve their wishes and desires in accordance with the Dharma, that all holy beings may continue to show the aspect of having long lives, so they continue to teach the Dharma and lead sentient beings out of samsara, and that we ourselves might become perfectly complete Buddhas, so that we might be able to benefit others more completely. So any merit we've accumulated, we dedicate to all these things. And let's offer the 2 dedication verses on page 36. As well as the long back prayer for His Holiness. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenre, Zigtens, and Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you so much. So the next 2 weeks will not be me. We have Venerable Gache next Saturday, and then Venerable Keldenla. Then there'll be a break. And then, sorry, those are both be online teachings. And then in the end of November, once we've gotten through all of our exams at the monastery, we're coming up with the two biggest exams of the year, our debate exam and our written exam. So that's kind of why their teachings are going to be online, because the travel is a little difficult. Our exams are in November. Then at the end of November, I'll come back. And we'll actually start the Wheel of Sharp Weapons when I come back. But so the next 2 weeks, we'll be continuing and teach us Jewel Garland and an intro to Lojong in general. And I believe there's a request to discuss maybe some Tonglen instruction. And so hopefully between Venerable Gachi and Venerable Keldalan, the next 2 weeks, one of them will be able to give some Tonglen instruction as well as part of the class. So hopefully you can continue, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Okay.
Fun. On the 26th, we have the night of Filipino, and we will do.
Yeah. So Venerable Rampton, for some of the newer students, was one of the longtime teachers here with Geshe Namdak and Geshe Leksok and Venerable Namjom, and Venerable Rapton would teach once a week. So they had 4 teachers cycling, and Venerable Rapton especially led meditation sessions and pujas and did a lot of those things. And so he'll be coming to lead pujas and prayers and give meditation instruction as well. So he happens to be back in Sarah. He lives in Singapore. He was living in Sarah for a long time because he was overseeing the food fund that the FPMT runs to feed all the monks of Sarah. And the organization from that changed. So he's no longer needed to be here at Sarah. So he lives in Singapore, but he's back for a little while. So we're very lucky that he's able to come while all of us are busy. So you get to have some practice with him as well. Okay. And so tomorrow morning, we'll be beginning our teaching on the Bodhicharyavatara, which is going to be a long-running teaching. It's not going to be quick, and the idea is going to be that anyone can come in anytime, that we're going to go through the whole thing in order. But if you miss a class, that's okay. You're not going to be set behind. So anyone can come at any time. It's going to be an introductory level class, but we'll be going through Shantideva's text, the Bodhicharyavatara. So that will start tomorrow morning. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're doing this next week.